Okay. Hi, my name is Adriana. I am a granddaughter of immigrants from Italy, Portugal, probably Northern Africa. So I have curly hair, long hair. I'm wearing glasses and a black dress, and I don't know how this is called, but I have like a sharp around my neck.
It's very beautiful.
Thank you. Yours is great. It's amazing. So, do you want to introduce yourself?
Um, so strange. Hello, my name is Chimamanda Adichie. I have big hair. I have natural black hair that's been stretched and curled, so it's a big mass of hair on my head. I'm wearing orangish lipstick. I'm wearing a dress that has one sleeve, so I have one bare arm, and the rest is covered in a dress that's sort of burgundy and drapey. And I'm a black woman. I'm a dark black woman, so my skin is the color of delicious milk chocolate.
Beautiful, gorgeous, I'd say. So, Shimamanda, as we said, this is more like a conversation, and I think we could start with perhaps people will be very curious to know where you are, where you are speaking to us right now.
I'm in Lagos. I'm at home in Lagos.
And Lagos. Are you living in
Yes.
Nigeria or somewhere else?
I live in Nigeria and in the US, so I have two homes. So
Okay.
I usually do half of the year in the US and half of the year in Nigeria.
Is it summer? Like summer in Nigeria, summer uh, like in Brazil, we have different stations, so you can do summer in Brazil and summer in the US as well.
Um, well, because in Nigeria we don't really have, I mean, we have the rainy season and we have the dry season, and that's it, and it's
Right.
always hot.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, it's
So
always hot. Sometimes
the
it's just
rainy
not.
season, is this the winter or the summer? The rainy season.
It's neither because it's all the temperature is always hot. So the rainy season, it's
Oh,
hot, but it rains. So this is actually the rainy season. It rained last
yeah.
night, but it's
Well, yeah,
about
more or
85
less
degrees
like in
Fahrenheit.
Brazil, right? It's more or less like in Brazil when we say we have a winter here. For most people in the north, it's going to be summer, a nice
Mm.
temperature. Shimamanda, you have delivered uh, a landmark TED talk that was about, I absolutely loved it. It spoke to my heart, the danger of a single story. I think it might be helpful if you could tell those who are not familiar with what exactly it means a single story. What is it? What is a single narrative that we should avoid?
Um, I gave that talk because I really think it's very important that we hear different stories.
Yeah,
And so the single story is having one story of a place or a person and then thinking that it is the only story of that place or that person. And an example I like to use and that I used in the talk was when I was in the US and I was a student. At the time,
uh-huh.
there was a lot of talk about Mexicans and a lot of talk about immigration. And
Right,
all of the news coverage about Mexicans was negative. Everything was about Mexicans were coming in illegally, Mexicans were bringing disease, all kinds of negative stories. And
right.
that's all I heard about Mexico. And then I went to Mexico and I was so surprised to see that Mexico was full of people who were doing all kinds of different things, people who were
Right.
laughing, who had happy lives. And then I was so ashamed because I realized that until then, the only thing I knew about Mexicans was that story of Mexicans being poor immigrants, and I had thought that that was the only story of Mexicans. And
Right,
so for me, it's important that we, as people in the world, that we hear different stories of places and
right.
people, because nobody's ever a single story.
And not just different stories, but different views of the same story, right? As you said, you
Yes,
went to
yes,
Mexico and you had your own
yes.
view and your own opinion of Mexico. It's so colorful and so happy. It's a beautiful country. I think I related to that TED talk a lot, also because in my trips as a reporter, I saw a lot of this. So if you talk about Afghanistan and the crisis that we saw recently, all that you hear about Afghanistan is negative and it's about terrorism. And when you go to Afghanistan, there are these amazing, people with a beautiful millenary culture, and they are very. They love to receive people in their homes. They are very kind, and you have these new generations that were very willing to take their country, in their own hands. They took all opportunities that were given to them. So I interviewed a boxing athlete, a girl. They trained in a stadium where, when the first Taliban regime came, some women were executed in that stadium, and these girls, they were using sports to fight discrimination and violence and everything, and they wanted to train there to in that stadium because of this. I met Shamsia Hassani, who is a beautiful artist, a beautiful graffiti artist. She's the first Afghan graffiti artist, and many other girls and boys who were really these beautiful musicians that there are in Afghanistan, in Kabul. There is this school of music that was opened by an Afghan who had been a refugee, and then when the U.S. came in, because the Taliban was out, he returned and he wanted to help to rebuild the country. So it's so different, the when you go to places, when we hear to people, right? Our idea of the world changes.
Even just hearing you talk about Afghanistan, I just find it so lovely. And I think particularly now, because obviously what's happening in Afghanistan is very depressing. And
Yeah,
I mean, all I've been thinking about is what is already happening and what's going to happen to women in Afghanistan. And so just even hearing you talk about this training in boxing, and there's something about it that makes one remember, um, that it's not just about women, even though it's really important to talk about the horrible experiences that women have gone through under the Taliban, and will. It's also just important. It's really just lovely for me to just hear the stories now, because I don't know. It just helps to keep things in perspective. And
yeah,
and also
exactly.
I should say that, yeah, but that when I talk about, especially in the case of Nigeria and of Africa, where I come from, it's not that we are saying that one should not talk honestly about a place. So Africa is a
Of
continent that
course.
has many problems, and people like to talk about all the problems in Africa, and that's important. But for me, the
Right.
point is, you cannot even understand the problems in Africa if you don't understand the full context. So this
Hmm.
story that you've just told me about women in Afghanistan, I think those stories are important, because that's how we start to see how far women have come and what they are in danger
Yeah.
of losing, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
because it gives us context about what, yeah.
Yeah. I interviewed this commander of the first female army battalion. They were training those women because, of course, in Afghan culture, if a man, especially a stranger and a foreigner, to enter the house and see the women is
Yeah.
shocking for them. Even if you
Yeah.
you disconsider the Taliban, even when the Taliban was gone, this is a part of their culture, the way they preserve
Yeah.
the family, the, the, the life among family. And
Yeah.
so they were training these women to do this, to enter the houses when necessary, so at least they would be women. And this commander, she was amazing. She was a poet, and she had a blog of Afghan poetry. And she met her loved
Ah.
one, her husband to be, on the website because he read her poetry. And all
Oh.
those life coincidences. He was actually
Ah.
a soldier and a lower patent than hers, and they were from different ethnicities, which is very rare in Afghanistan that you marry, they have Pashtuns and Tajiks and Hazaras, all different groups, and it's very rare that they intermarriage. Um, but she was marrying him, and he was younger. He was from another tribe. He was from a lower patent than hers, and she was just doing it. And she was the commander of these absolutely amazing women. So yeah, I mean, I love Afghanistan. I've been there 4 times, and
Oh, I
and
love this
it's an
story. I
amazing
absolutely love this story.
place. I
I
think.
love it.
How do you think? Yeah, it is really amazing. And when you hear them, it's a different story. I remember also when I first went to Iran, all I heard about Iran was this horrible, sad place, and women had to cover, and the government was horrible. And then I saw a picture of Iran with women laughing and children playing. And I said, well, this is not Iran that I've heard of. So I want to go there. And I went there, and I dressed all black,
Mm.
covered my face and everything. And as I got to the airport, my translator, who I had agreed with picking me up in the airport, I didn't know her personally. She was wearing jeans and, a pink hijab, and she had makeup, and she was beautiful. And she looked at me. She was like, "Why are you dressing like this? Why are you covering yourself?" And I was like, "Well, I thought." And she was, "No, we are very modern, And she took me driving. She was driving, and we were listening to funk in the car, Iranian music. So yeah. Anyway, but how do you think, Shimamanda, that people could in their daily lives, open up to different narratives? How can they be alert to one single story, to avoid one single narrative, one single view of events?
I can talk about how I try to live my life, which is that I'm always seeking out other perspectives. So
Mm.
when I'm uh, when I'm consuming the media, for example, I'm constantly aware that everyone has a point of view, and that
Exactly.
this idea of an objective voice or an objective story is just not true. So I'm always seeking out. So if I read a piece about China, for example, in an American newspaper, I'm always trying to see if there is a Chinese source that I can read to
Right.
see, what the take is from the other side. And then often, in my opinion, the real truth is somewhere at the center. Right? So I
Mhm.
decide. I think it's also always reading with a kind of healthy skepticism. I'm reading
Right.
something and I want to learn. I think of myself as a student of life and a student for life. I want to learn until
That's
I'm no longer
beautiful.
alive. And I think there's so much to learn. So my sort of attitude to the world is that I want to learn. And I think having that means then that you know that you don't know it all and that there's always room to learn something. And I think maybe the last thing is I really like local knowledge. So if I came to Brazil, for example, I mean, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
before I come to Brazil, I'll read some books or look at some travel guides. But really, for me, the most
Mm,
interesting thing is to talk to people.
right.
So if there's a bus driver and I'm being driven from Rio, so to ask him, what's your life like? Where you do you have kids? Where are they? And that I find is sometimes the best way to learn about a place. And often also I like to ask people what annoys them or what upsets them or what do they not like about, maybe their country or the government. And it's
About the country.
fascinating. It's fascinating the things. Mhm. And
Yeah,
I also
that's
like to
right.
ask people about love.
Oh, that's
I like
that's
to ask
that's
people about love.
beautiful. That's beautiful. It's people don't expect when you ask those things, right? When
Yeah,
you ask
yeah,
about love, they don't
yeah,
expect, so you kind of
yeah,
make them a
yeah.
bit vulnerable, but it's nice. It creates a connection. I love to ask
Yeah.
those questions as well. I remember when I spoke to Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani girl who is the
Mm,
Nobel Peace Prize. She was telling me very similar to your thoughts. She thinks a lot like you, that people. She was saying that because I wrote a children's book about her life. I've been to the Swat Valley where she lived, and I wrote a children's book about her in Brazil, about her life before she became famous, because that's what another thing, right? When people become famous, we think their lives started there, and we don't see, all the struggles and the mistakes they made, and the fight when nobody was looking at them, right?
yes.
When
Yeah.
they were fighting alone and without the lights on them. But she said something interesting, that was, she wrote a book about herself. It's one view of herself. And then there is a book, if a Brazilian writes a book about her, it's another view, because I come from a different context. I come from the
Yes.
West,
Yeah.
though it's the South. And if an American
Mm.
writes, it's going to be yet another view. And probably
Mm-hmm.
people around her, the friends and the people in Pakistan, have yet another view of her. And she said, this is all me, because I'm not just what I think of me, I'm also what
Yeah.
everyone else thinks, and how they see me. So I thought it was interesting as well. And I felt that as a Brazilian, that I had a completely different perspective of countries in the Middle East or Asia than American journalists. Not that they are their fault. It's not their fault. It's just that the the luggage, the baggage that we carry, um,
Yeah.
as that we carry of all our lives, right?
Yeah. And also, I think it's important to be very honest about these things. Yes. And also, it's about power. It's about coming from a
Right.
part of the world that has relatively less power um, than a country
Yeah.
like America. And so, of course, if you grew up, because I've often felt that if I had grown up in the US, I would be an entirely different person. Not
Hmm.
necessarily a better or worse person, but there's something about growing up in a country that not only is at the center of the world, but sees itself as the center of the world. And so
Right.
there's a kind of assumption that you don't necessarily need to know about anything
Right.
outside your country because your country is the center. And when I went to the US, when I first went to the US to go to college, I just remember being shocked at how little people knew about my continent.
Right.
And
Me too.
that my roommate would ask me, do you have houses in Nigeria? And I thought,
And that
what?
they speak good English. It was so funny that
Yes.
I remember this. I don't know if from, I think if it's from your TED
Yeah.
talk, that she
Hmm.
said,
Hmm.
oh, she speaks English. And
Yeah.
yeah,
She said, well, where did you learn to speak English so well? And I thought, well, my country is English speaking. But you know
Exactly.
what I realized is that being American, a certain kind of American, they did not feel, my roommates, any urgency to learn about the world. But
Right.
I think that if you grew up in a country that is not at the center of things, you have to by necessity be curious about everything outside of your country because things are coming in that are not made by you, and
That's
so you kind
true.
of have to. But in the U.S., the thing about Americans is that Americans consume American culture, and then the rest of the
Yeah.
world also consumes American culture. So
Right.
so there's an imbalance, and I think it affects the way that they look at the world. I mean, obviously not
Yeah.
all of them, but this had my experience in the late 1990s when I first went to the U.S. was actually really really interesting for me. I just could not believe it.
How, I was going to ask you, it's one of the questions that I had for you. Do you think if you had stayed in Nigeria, if you had never been to the US, uh, would your view would be different? Did the US change you as well, or the way you see your own country or yourself?
Yes, yes, yes. I think leaving home always changes you. It has to. So it gave me a kind of perspective so that when I was in Nigeria, I think that there's certain things I couldn't really see about my country and about my people because it was too
Right.
close. When I went to the US,
Exactly.
suddenly I had this distance and I could look at Nigeria from the outside and with distance. And also I could look at Nigeria having something else to compare it with because now I had
Mm.
this other world, I guess, which was America. And so I
The
think it's
other
certainly.
angle, right? It's looking from another angle, right?
Yes, yes. So it certainly changed. If I had stayed on in Nigeria, oh, there's so much I wouldn't even really, I think, wouldn't even really think about. So an example is race, right?
Mhm.
I became aware of my identity as a black person when I went to the US. Because in Nigeria, being a black person is really not a relevant identity because all of us are black. So
Right.
nobody talks about black as an identity. In Nigeria, we talk about ethnicity and we talk about religion,
Mm-hmm.
but not race.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
now that because I've lived in the US, it's become one of the identities I have. But it's an identity that I have only when I'm in America.
Mm.
And I have
Interesting.
friends here in Nigeria who did not leave Nigeria and who sometimes don't really understand the nuances of race and racism because they haven't really lived in a place that had racism as part of its social makeup.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel the need to be? I often find people who as you said, when we live in our own context, we don't see things because they are too close to us, right? And then we go
Yeah,
abroad, and I've
yeah,
seen this several times, the stories of people who go abroad and then choose to come back to their own country, and even myself, when I was in the US or in the UK, the need to be more Brazilian. I just wanted to, I felt like I wanted to be my identity, to reinforce my identity. Did you feel
yes.
like this as well?
Yes, often I did. Yes, yes. So I went through the first few months was the opposite for me. I started to do a very good American accent because I was
Mm.
so tired of Americans saying, "Oh, where's your accent from?" So I then started to do an American accent, but I don't know how long it took me. Maybe a year. And one day I
Mm.
suddenly thought, "This is not who I am." Suddenly I wanted to hold on to who I was because living in America
Exactly.
made me start to appreciate a lot of the things about my own history and my own culture. And this was happening at a time when it's not that I did not like America. I liked America. But at the same
Yeah,
time, I suddenly wanted to assert my own individual
exactly.
self
Yes.
because the thing about America is that if you're not an American, America will let you know that you're not an American.
Right.
And so suddenly I really wanted, I wanted people to pronounce my full name properly. I didn't want to shorten my name. I stopped doing the American accent because it was too much,
Right.
it took too much of an effort. And I just kind of then embraced my Nigerianness more in a way that would not have happened if I had stayed on in Nigeria.
Exactly. I think that is so important that we have these other perspectives and angles, and only while traveling, maybe books can do
Mm,
that if you cannot leave your country. But it is very different, and I felt the same. And the accent was also. I remember uh, when I arrived in the U.S. I went to a school because I knew how to speak English. My accent is very Latin American, and then I did this for I don't know, so 3, 4, 5 months, and then I realized like I am Latin American. I'm Brazilian, so
yes,
I'm
yes,
not American. So my accent is part of who I am. Deal with it,
yes,
you know.
yes.
I think this is really important.
Me too.
Chimamanda, sorry.
I said me too.
Yeah, well, it's part of who we are, and it's not that I did like America as well, but it's just about identity and not trying to be something else, right? Um,
Mm,
do you think
yeah.
how did you feel? You are one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the whole world. You have won several prizes in the US, um, US National Book Critics Circle Awards, the New York Times Top 10 Best Books in 2013. The list goes on and on. How, how, how important were those prizes for you? For winning those prizes outside your country, in the US especially. Was it important at all?
I think recognition is always important. I think as a writer, you start out and you write a book and you're not even sure that anybody's going to read it. So when somebody reads it and then somebody decides to give you a prize, it's always a good feeling. Always,
Right,
it doesn't get old, right? But at the same time, I didn't start out. You know, winning prizes is not the reason I write. I write because I love writing, because I really think
right.
that that's why I'm here. I really think of it as a vocation. And so it's important in the sense that it's very encouraging, and it can make you feel that what you're doing is worth it, you know.
Right.
But at the same time, it's not, if I hadn't had the good fortune of winning those prizes, I would still be writing.
Right.
Because writing is the thing that's actually important. It's the thing that gives me meaning.
Did you feel more um, self-confident because of those prizes? And I'm speaking now again about me. One of the things that I felt in the US, as you said, they will make you know that you are not American. And again, it's part of their culture, the power, how
Mhm,
developed they are and the money and everything,
mhm,
that normally people suppose that you know less because you are not
mm.
American, right? Or you
Yes,
can do
yes,
not so good because you are not American.
yeah,
So
yeah.
did you feel that? Did it give you yourself more self-confidence in the beginning,
Mm,
perhaps?
Actually, you know what? Honestly, no, because I did not. I never. So Americans assume that if you're not American, you know less. That's true, but I think for me, I did not agree with them from the beginning. So
Right.
I I'll give you an example. When I first came to the US, and people were like, "Oh, how did you learn to speak English so well?" And I would say, "Well, my country is English speaking." But also what I would be thinking is,
Mm.
but how come you Americans don't speak English that well? Because no, but really, because they would say certain things, and I would think, no, that's incorrect. That's very poor grammar. Right? They would say, I'm eating a apple, and I'm thinking, no, it's an apple. Or they would say, I want to lay down, and I'm thinking, what? That's wrong. So I did not, in fact, I just did not allow a certain kind of American arrogance make me feel less than. Never. So
Well,
I think what the prizes did for me, it wasn't even just about America. It just gave me, um, it encouraged me in a creative way. It made me feel that this thing that I love doing, writing, that maybe I should keep doing it, because actually some
right.
people were reading it. Yeah.
What
So
would
if
you
you gave me a
say?
confidence, it was no, I was
You
just going
go
to say
ahead.
that if it gave me a confidence, then it was a creative confidence. It wasn't about thinking that somehow because I wasn't American I wasn't good enough.
Mm.
I actually often wanted to correct Americans when they were speaking English.
Amazing. What would you say for people, Brazilians, Afghans, Iranians, people who live perhaps in what is called Mexicans, the developing world, countries in Africa? What would you tell them if they have a dream, if they want, to be like Chimamanda once? How would you encourage them?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is never ever apologize for being who you are. Never apologize for coming from where you come from.
That's
Um,
beautiful.
and and it's easy to think that what we consider mainstream is the only thing that is worthwhile. But that's not true. And so I think for
Right.
people who want to be storytellers in all kinds of ways, whether writing, acting, even music, the best thing you can be is the best version of yourself. You cannot be as good as someone else on their own terms.
Right.
And I say this a lot to young people in this country where I say to them, there's no point in trying to speak in a fake American accent because you're never going to sound as American as an American. So
Right.
you might as well just
And you
sound like
don't need
yourself.
to, right?
You don't need to because as long as you do whatever you want to do well, that's the thing.
Right.
You have to work hard. You have to be dedicated. You really have to do the work, but do it well, and it will not matter. It will not matter where you come from. And actually, sometimes where you come from becomes the reason that you get up there, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
we now live in a world where people want to see diversity. I like,
Right.
for example, what Netflix is doing.
Mm.
So Netflix has all of these films from all parts of the world, and I
Right. I love
realized
that. Yeah.
recently I haven't watched an American film in a long time because I'm just watching
Right.
films from everywhere, um, and I just actually find them more interesting. And so really, I think for whoever wants to succeed, to achieve something, really, for me, the first thing is you have to do the work very hard, and the second thing is do not ever apologize.
Right.
Don't start off, don't start off thinking that somehow you coming from a place that's not the center of the West is a problem or a mistake. It's not. It's not.
Right. Thank you so much, Shimamanda. We are approaching the end. We have only 5 minutes. It's amazing. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. You were so inspiring that I didn't see the time going. Um, I'm gonna ask one last question. I know this is more of a conversation, but as a journalist, I can't help myself, so I have to ask you questions. One is, um, if you would like people, if people could take one thing from a conversation with you, this conversation or any other conversation, what would you like that to be? And also, if we have time, if you could speak a bit about your new book, which I'm very curious about. The most recent book, which is, I think,
Um,
about your father.
mm, mm. What would I like people to, I don't know. It's a difficult question to answer. What would I like people to take away from this conversation, or
Or from any other conversation with you. I think you've given us a lot of inspiring tips, inspiring thoughts. Like don't
um,
apologize and things like this. But if there was one thing
mm,
that you of your the message you want to pass to the world as a writer that you don't want people to miss, what the message it would be.
um, oh, I don't know. It's hard to. Well, actually, maybe I can talk about the two things in the same way, which is my book, which is really an essay, called Notes
Mm-hmm.
on Grief, and it's about it's notes on my grief when my father died
Right.
last June, and it really nothing as devastating had happened to me until then.
Yeah.
So I was just completely. I fell apart. I'm still kind of in a strange place of grief, especially as my mother also died. But Notes on Grief is about trying to make sense of losing the most important man in my
Right.
life, the man who was my anchor. And what it made me, it has changed me. I think I'm a different person now than I was before my father died. And one of the ways in which it has changed me is to think about, like, how do I really want to live? Like, what kind of life do I want? And
Mm.
so if I wanted people to take anything away, it's how important it is to think about, to kind of be reflective about life, right? And reflective and intentional, because life is so short. We don't know. I mean, losing my
Right.
parents has made me realize. It's made me realize how we don't know. You know how the only thing we're in control of is right now, because we really don't know what's going to happen
Right.
tomorrow. And so it's just kind of made me think about. It's made me think about living my life in a way that doing the things that I really want to do, the things I value, and most of all, it's also made me not have patience for certain things. So I like to tell my friends that I no longer have time for bullshit because life is too short. And
Yeah,
so,
and it is.
and yeah, and so it means that if there's certain things that I would tolerate before, even though it made me unhappy, I'm not going to tolerate it anymore.
It's beautiful. Shimamanda, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to add to our conversation?
I don't think so. No.
Please come to
Thank you.
Brazil.
I really
You
love. I
know,
will. I
you
really
would,
love that story you told me about
you
the
have
Afghan
to,
women. Thank you.
and of course, please keep writing and
I will.
sharing with us. Thank you so much, Shimamanda.
Thank you.
I really
Take
appreciate
care.
it. Take care.
Thank you. You too.